dragging down the creature's head and so retarding its speed that before it had reached me it was almost stopped, and devoting all its energies to attempting to scrape off its attackers with its forefeet. Diane had seen and recognized me, and was trying to extricate herself from the grasp of her captor, who, handicapped by his strong and agile prisoner, was unable to wield his lance effectively upon the two Jalocs. At the same time I was running swiftly toward them. When the man discovered me, he released his hold upon Diane and sprang to the ground, ready with his lance to meet me. My javelin was no match for his longer weapon, which was used more for stabbing than as a missile. Should I miss him at my first cast, as was quite probable, since he was prepared for me, I would have to face his formidable lance with nothing more than a stone knife. The outlook was scarcely entrancing. Evidently I was soon to be absolutely at his mercy. Seeing my predicament, he ran toward me to get rid of one antagonist before he had to deal with the other two. He could not guess, of course, that the two Jalocs were hunting with me, but he doubtless thought that after they had finished the leady, they would make after the human prey. The beasts are notorious killers, often slaying wantonly. But as the Thurian came, Raja loosened his hold upon the leady and dashed for him, with the female close after. When the man saw them, he yelled to me to help him, protesting that we should both be killed if we did not fight together, but I only laughed at him and ran toward Diane. Both the fierce beasts were upon the Thurian simultaneously. He must have died almost before his body tumbled to the ground. Then the female wheeled toward Diane. I was standing by her side as the thing charged her, my javelin ready to receive her. But again Raja was too quick for me. I imagined he thought she was making for me, for he couldn't have known anything of my relations toward Diane. At any rate, he leaped full upon her back and dragged her down. There ensued forthwith as terrible a battle as one would wish to see if battles were gauged by volume of noise and riotousness of action. I thought that both the beasts would be torn to shreds. When finally the female ceased to struggle and rolled over on her back, her forepaws limply folded, I was sure that she was dead. Raja stood over her, growling, his jaws close to her throat. Then I saw that neither of them bore a scratch. The male had simply administered a severe drubbing to his mate. It was his way of teaching her that I was sacred. After a moment he moved away and let her rise, when she set about smoothing down her rumpled coat, while he came stalking toward Diane and me. I had an arm about Diane now. As Raja came close, I caught him by the neck and pulled him up to me. There I stroked him and talked to him, bidding Diane do the same, until I think he pretty well understood that if I was his friend, so was Diane. For a long time he was inclined to be shy of her, often baring his teeth at her approach, and it was a much longer time before the female made friends with us. But by careful kindness, by never eating without sharing our meat with them, and by feeding them from our hands, we finally won the confidence of both animals. However, that was a long time after. With the two beasts trotting after us, we returned to where we had left Juag. Here I had the Dickens' own time keeping the female from Juag's throat. Of all the venomous, wicked, cruel-hearted beasts on two worlds, I think a female hyaenodon takes the palm. But eventually she tolerated Juag as she had Diane and me, and the five of us set out toward the coast, for Juag had just completed his labors on the Thag when we arrived. We ate some of the meat before starting, and gave the hounds some. All that we could we carried upon our backs. On the way to the canoe we met with no mishaps. Diane told me that the fellow who had stolen her had come upon her from behind while the roaring of the Thag had drowned all other noises, and that the first she had known he had disarmed her and thrown her to the back of his leady, which had been lying down close by waiting for him. By the time the Thag had ceased bellowing, the fellow had got well away upon his swift mount. By holding one palm over her mouth, he had prevented her calling for help. "I thought," she concluded, "that I should have to use the viper's tooth after all." We reached the beach at last and unearthed the canoe. Then we busied ourselves stepping a mast and rigging a small sail. Juag and I, that is, while Diane cut the thag meat in long strips for drying when we should be out in the sunlight once more. At last all was done. We were ready to embark. I had no difficulty in getting Raja aboard the dugout, but Renee, as we christened her after I had explained to Diane the meaning of Raja and its feminine equivalent, positively refused for a time to follow her mate aboard. In fact, we had to shove off without her. After a moment, however, she plunged into the water and swam after us. I let her come alongside, and then Juag and I pulled her in, she snapping and snarling at us as we did so. But strange to relate, she didn't offer to attack us after we had ensconced her safely in the bottom alongside Raja. The canoe behaved much better under sail than I had hoped, infinitely better than the battleship Sorry had, and we made good progress almost due west across the gulf, upon the opposite side of which I hoped to find the mouth of the river of which Juag had told me. The islander was much interested and impressed by the sail and its results. He had not been able to understand exactly what I hoped to accomplish with it while we were fitting up the boat, but when he saw the clumsy dugout move steadily through the water without paddles, he was as delighted as a child. We made splendid headway on the trip, coming into sight of land at last. Juag had been terror-stricken when he had learned that I intended crossing the ocean, and when we passed out of sight of land, he was in a blue funk. He said that he had never heard of such a thing before in his life, and that always he had understood that those who ventured far from land never returned, for how could they find their way when they could see no land to steer for? I tried to explain the compass to him, and though he never really grasped the scientific explanation of it, yet he did learn to steer by it quite as well as I. We passed several islands on the journey, islands which Juag told me were entirely unknown to his own island folk. Indeed, our eyes may have been the first ever to rest upon them. I should have liked to stop off and explore them, but the business of empire would brook no unnecessary delays. I asked Juag how Hooja expected to reach the mouth of the river which we were in search of if he didn't cross the gulf, and the islander explained that Hooja would undoubtedly follow the coast around. For some time we sailed up the coast searching for the river, and at last we found it. So great was it that I thought it must be a mighty gulf until the mass of driftwood that came out upon the first ebb tide convinced me that it was the mouth of a river. There were the trunks of trees uprooted by the undermining of the river banks, giant creepers, flowers, grasses, and now and then the body of some land animal or bird. I was all excitement to commence our upward journey, when there occurred that which I had never before seen within Pellucidar, a really terrific windstorm. It blew down the river upon us with a ferocity and suddenness that took our breaths away, and before we could get a chance to make the shore it became too late. The best that we could do was to hold the scudding craft before the wind and race along in a smother of white spume. Juag was terrified. If Diane was, she hid it, for was she not the daughter of a once great chief, the sister of a king, and the mate of an emperor? Raja and Renee were frightened. The former crawled close to my side and buried his nose against me. Finally, even fierce Renee was moved to seek sympathy from a human being. She slunk to Diane, pressing close against her and whimpering, while Diane stroked her shaggy neck and talked to her as I talked to Raja. There was nothing for us to do but try to keep the canoe right side up and straight before the wind. For what seemed an eternity the tempest neither increased nor abated. I judged that we must have blown 100 miles before the wind and straight out into an unknown sea. As suddenly as the wind rose, it died again, and when it died, it veered to blow at right angles to its former course in a gentle breeze. I asked Juag then what our course was, for he had had the compass last. It had been on a leather thong about his neck. When he felt for it, the expression that came into his eyes told me as plainly as words what had happened. The compass was lost. The compass was lost. And we were out of sight of land without a single celestial body to guide us. Even the pendant world was not visible from our position. Our plight seemed hopeless to me, but I dared